Welcome, everybody. So, that first crazy music I was just playing you was a project that I did a long time ago. This artist, he's a jazz artist. His name is Bob James. And Bob was invited to China to perform with some music students. And in China, apparently the music schools are very, very difficult to get into. And so Bob was invited, and he met these young, incredibly talented musicians, all in their early 20s. And we rent out their studio in Shanghai, and this studio was huge. It was gorgeous, big, beautiful studio, and it's where they did their radio show. They had a public broadcast radio show every week, and they would have orchestra, and they would have actors, and they would have all sorts of things going on in this giant studio. And the room was beautiful and had the biggest, thickest doors you've ever seen, an incredible isolation, big, tall ceiling. I think I told you a little bit about it before. They had all the wall panels would flip, and they would be hard on one side and soft on the other, and they would do it up like, all the way up 3 stories. All these panels would flip back and forth. They had an incredible collection of microphones, all of these gorgeous DPA microphones. Back then, they were called B&K microphones. And they were super high-end classical microphones. As a matter of fact, they had some classical microphones that B&K had only made a few sets of. And I was able to use all these great mics to make this recording. But these students had never really heard jazz before, and they really didn't have any idea what they were getting into, but loved the idea of it. They could read like you wouldn't believe. They were the most musical individuals I've ever met. And by the end of the recording session, Bob had them improvising, and they had no idea about improvising. So here I am. I'm recording all these instruments I've never recorded before. There's a wooden type of flute they have that's got a vibrating piece of I don't know it's a paper or a reed or something in it, so it makes a very raspy sound. There's this instrument called a guqing, and it's a big, giant, kind of a koto-looking thing. There's a couple of erhu players, which is the Chinese version of a violin. And there's a pipa player, and the pipa player is, I equate it to a banjo. They play it very fast with a tremolo, type of sound to it. So we go over there, and we get to make this incredible project together. And Bob just jumped in with both feet, and he he didn't have any idea what to write for the kids either. And so I just want to play you a little bit of that so you could kind of experience what a unique cultural thing it was for me. And then after we did this album, we went on the road with it, and we toured Japan, and we toured the United States. And so all of these Chinese citizens got to leave the country and come to the United States for a tour. And it was a big deal for them, and very exciting for us. So that's it. That's my little China story. And God, the food was incredible there. The people that we were dealing with were just incredibly talented. But I will say one thing: they had an SSL 9000 console, which, if you know anything about consoles, is an incredibly expensive console, and it was big and gorgeous. And we got there, and they had been doing construction, and nobody thought, because it was a government building, nobody thought to cover the console. And so we got there. There was literally that much dust over the entire console. And there wasn't a music store that we could run to and buy whatever we wanted. So, for example, the drummer, they had a drum kit there for us, but it was, one was purple, one was orange, and, just mismatched kit. So the drummer, we have this Indian drummer who's another amazing musician also. He gets this kit out of the storage and knocks all the dust off of it, and the heads are completely dented in with drumsticks and just really bad shape. And so we couldn't find a music store to buy new drum heads. And so we called another drummer. He knew a Chinese drummer, and we rented drum heads for the session. And after the session, we took the drum heads back off and gave it back to the drummer. But it was just an amazing experience, and recording these these instruments are very soft. All the Chinese instruments don't make a lot of noise acoustically. So I had to isolate the drums in another room and the piano in a room. And I put the piano in the big room with all the ensemble. And it was pretty incredible experience. So today, what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about a couple of terms that many people get confused in audio. And those two terms are phase and polarity. So a few weeks ago, we talked about how sound was transmitted and about sound waves. And, we had these little squiggly lines that represent the air molecules moving back and forth in a pattern. And those squiggly lines, the closer they are together, that's the frequency. And the more they move, that's the amplitude. And so we watched the video explaining all this and how the molecules behave. And we also talked about transients and what the transient is. A transient is the start of a note or a musical sound or any sound, really. And it's a short attack, and then after is a decay. So this transient is what we use for editing. And what I want to talk about today is how waveforms combine. So the first thing is polarity. So when we take an electrical signal and we swap the voltage between negative and positive, that's called changing the polarity or flipping the polarity. So if you imagine a battery and you've got a negative and a positive and you turn the battery around, that's flipping polarity. And sound waves work in much the same way. You have a part of the sound wave that's positive as the air molecules push forward. And then you have another one where the air molecules retract, and that's a negative, right? So this is the normal pattern of sound waves. They move forward first, and then they come backward. If you reverse the polarity electronically, you get the opposite. You get a sound wave that starts going down first and then comes up. So when we change this electrical function, that's called polarity. So besides polarity, we have phase. Phase shift is caused by delaying one of two signals in time, which results in the offsetting of one of the signals. This can be the product of acoustical, electrical, or mechanical operations. So what does this mean? This means that if you have a source, and maybe you have two different microphones, and they're positioned, further or closer to the source. Where's the mic? There we go. So as we shift this time axis, we get phase shift. And so I came across this really short video that explains this, and then we'll go into it and we'll demonstrate it in Pro Tools in a minute here.
In this video, you'll learn the difference between polarity and phase. But if you're new to this channel, my name is Kyle. If you want to learn audio production online, subscribe to Audio University. While it's very common to confuse polarity and phase, it's important to understand how they're different. It will help if you have a basic understanding of how sound works. As you may already know, a sound wave is a cycle of positive and negative pressure changes. A microphone converts those pressure changes into a cycle of positive and negative voltages in a wire. This signal begins with a positive voltage and then continues through a negative voltage. Let's flip the polarity of this signal. Now the signal begins with a negative voltage. Most mixing consoles, DSPs, or DAWs give you the ability to flip or invert the polarity of a signal. It's the equivalent of switching the positive and negative wire in a microphone cable or in a speaker cable. To better understand the difference between polarity and phase, let's imagine identical audio signals traveling through two separate cables. These two copies of the signal are currently in the same polarity. They will add together at the destination. This is called constructive interference. Reversing the positive and negative wires on one of the cables will invert the polarity of the signal passing through that cable. Now the signals are in opposite polarity. When they're mixed together at the destination, they'll completely cancel out. This is called destructive interference. While polarity is a function of positive and negative, phase is a function of time. To help visualize this, I'll put a delay in the second cable path. At the source, the signals are synchronized. They begin and end at the same time. However, one of the signals is delayed. By the time the signals reach the destination, they're out of sync. Audio waves are cycles. The cycle of this wave begins at 0, goes through a positive phase, and then progresses through a negative phase. Just like a circle, the points along the cycle of a sound wave can be charted from 0 degrees to 360 degrees. In our example, the second copy of the wave arrives as the first copy is halfway through one cycle. This means the signals are 180 degrees out of phase. The first wave is negative as the second wave is positive. This will cause destructive interference because now the waves work against one another. A phase shift doesn't always result in a perfect summation or a perfect cancellation. Up until this point, our examples have contained only one frequency. However, most audio signals contain many frequencies. In fact, this highlights one of the most practical differences between polarity and phase. In this example, we have two identical signals, each containing the same 3 frequencies. Inverting the polarity of one of these signals will cause a complete cancellation when they mix together at the destination. Inverting the polarity of a signal affects all frequencies in that signal evenly. However, a phase shift will affect each frequency a bit differently. Some frequencies will sum together, some frequencies will partially cancel, and some frequencies will perfectly cancel. Remember, polarity is a function of positive and negative wiring, whereas phase is a function of time. If you got value out of this video, hit the like button, share the video, and for more content like this, subscribe to Audio University.
Alrighty, so I have a little example set up in Pro Tools today, and I thought I'd show you guys this. So we talked about routing signals the other day, and I'll explain what I have set up. I have a couple of signal generators here. And let me just turn off these other tracks to make it more clear. Okay, so I have a signal generator that's generating a tone at 200 hertz. And the reason I chose 200 hertz, it's kind of random. It's because it's not annoying to listen to. So I'm going to turn on this generator, and you can see the signal here, and then I'm going to unmute it. And then now I'm sending this signal out a bus like we talked about before. And I'm just going to go to the mixer window and show you because maybe it'll be a little more clear. So here's my signal, and here's my source, the generator. And the generator has an output that is going to bus 1. And then bus 1 is traveling to an audio track so I can record this signal. And so I have bus 1 routed into this audio track. And that's how I'm going to record my tone. Oops. We didn't want to groove with it, did we? Stand by. Okay. So by the way, if you're ever recording and you make a mistake, you can just hit Command period and it will cancel the recording in the middle. All right, so now I have my tone. I'm going to take this out of record. And let's take a look at the tone. There's our sine wave. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this waveform that I've already made, and I'm going to, first I'm going to truncate it so that it starts at exactly the cycle going up. This isn't really necessary. It just helps in the demonstration. And then I'm going to delete this little amount of time here by going to Shuffle and Delete. All right, so I have my sine wave here. I'm going to copy. I'm going to hit to move my selection down, I'm going to hit the colon key. And I'm going to paste it. So now I have an exact duplicate of my sine wave, my 200 hertz sine wave. So I have a VU meter here, and I've calibrated this VU meter so that when I play one sine wave, it registers -6. All right, so see it on the VU here. And when I add a second sine wave to it, those two signals are going to sum together. And when they sum together, I'm going to get 6 dB of additional volume. So this happens in all of audio. Anytime you double the source or double the track, you get 6 dB more volume. So it's twice as loud. 6 dB is twice as loud. So I'm going to just unmute the second track now, and these two are going to sum together. And you'll see my meters go up to 0. So there's my 6 dB. Right. So now I want to show you polarity. So there's polarity. I'm going to flip this actual polarity of this second waveform down here. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. We haven't talked about the Audio Suite plugins yet. But if you click on the Audio Suite menu, there are all these additional plugins. And these plugins are destructive plugins. So everything you do in Pro Tools in the window down here, it's non-destructive. Anything you do, you're not damaging the waveform. You're not, with the exception of maybe zooming in really far and drawing with the pencil tool on a waveform, which we're not going to really get into this semester. You can fix waveform problems by drawing the actual waveform. With the exception of that you really don't do any destructive editing. But we're going to use Audio Suite now. And this is fine to use this as long as you realize that you're changing the waveform and it's not going to come back. So I'm going to go to this plugin called Invert. And it does exactly that. So this second signal, I'm just going to hit Render. And we lose all audio. Okay, so we're completely canceling out. We're completely canceling out with the phase. And this is done by flipping the polarity. Right? So if you look, both of our tones are still playing, and if I mute one, we'll get it. It'll come back to -6. Right? But when I flip the phase or flip the polarity, then we have complete cancellation. So here's an example of combining waveforms and phase shift. So what we just did was we combined two waveforms that were identical. So waveform A plus this waveform here becomes a 6 dB increase in level. Every time you increase 6 dB, you're twice as loud. Okay, so that's what we've just done. So I'm going to undo that invert. And there's another way to invert the phase, and that's with a little plugin that you have that's free from Avid. And it's called Trim. And the Trim plugin is a volume trimming plugin. So this plugin you can use to adjust the level. And if you want to adjust level on a track for some reason, like for example, I'll do an entire mix, and the vocalist will say, "Well, can you give me a version that's the vocal is a half a dB louder, so I have something different to give the mastering guy." Well, I can just type in 0.5 here, and I can increase the level for an alternate mix, and it's an easy way. I don't have to mess with any automation. I don't really have to change anything to do that. But it also has a little button here, and this button flips the polarity. It inverts the polarity. So when I hit this, it also will cancel out that other waveform. Right? So let's turn that off for a second. So that's polarity. Now let's talk about phase and phase shift. So we have our sine wave here, and if I take this secondary sine wave and I move it in time, it's going to cause a shift, and it's going to cause cancellations. And the more that I move it up until a point, the more it will cancel until it completely cancels out the signal. So that's what we're going to do now. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a tool that we haven't been using, and that's the nudge tool. And I'm going to change the nudge value to the smallest thing I can, which is samples in Pro Tools. So I'm going to switch to samples, and I'm just going to put in 2 samples. And now my nudge value is 2 samples. So now I can move this waveform without touching it by using key commands. All right. So there's a couple of different key commands for nudge. One of them is the plus and minus here on the numeric keypad. And then the other way is the period and the comma. So those will move it also. And these are really useful for working with any kind of audio editing. You can set your nudge value to a beat or a measure, and you can nudge whatever amount you want. So if you want to move something 8 measures and you have your nudge value set to a measure, you can just click 8 times and it will move it those 8 measures. So we're going to start moving this waveform, and as we do, let's look back at our VU meter. You'll see what happens. So as I move it, we start getting phase cancellation, and the meters start going down. Now when I reach -3, let me go back to our slide here. So -3 is equal to 90 degrees phase shift. So the summation of these two is, it's only giving me 3 dB of boost as opposed to 6 dB. When I combined them when they were in sync, I got 6 dB. Now I've shifted them and I'm losing level because I'm getting cancellation. So I'm going to continue to move. And as I do, the meters keep going down. All right, now this is interesting. Now I am down where I started. I'm at -6 on the meters. And this is 120 degrees phase shift. So if I look at 120 degrees phase shift here, I have 0 summation. So it's not canceling and it's not adding. It's just staying the same. So if I go back here and I turn this track off, we don't have any level change. So I'm adding something, but I'm not adding any level at all. Okay, and now keep going now. Isn't it working? Oh, I'm sorry, I have it muted. So now let's go back to where we were. So here we are at our 120 degrees. As I keep going, the meters drop really quickly. And when I reach this null point, we have complete cancellation. So even though I have two tracks blasting away 200 hertz, right, if I mute one, it comes back. They're completely canceling out. So as I keep going the other direction, keep going further with it, that's 180 degrees off, by the way, phase shift. If I keep going the other way with it, eventually I'll get back to our 120 degrees. So it works in a circle, right? So we hit 90 first, and then we hit 120, and then we hit 180. And then as we come back around, we hit 120 again, and then 90, right? And it just continues in a circle. So I'm going to keep moving this waveform. And now we're at 120. Until we get perfect summation. So that's a simple example. We only have one tone. So let's make it a little more complicated here.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I guess my question is like for the project, do you expect us to mess around with this kind of stuff? Like for me, like this seems like more advanced. So I just don't know if you're just telling us this so we know it. Like I don't know what skills and strategies you want us to apply to the project. I don't know.
It'll become clear as I finish my talk here. I'm just explaining what happens electronically when you shift phase, and I'm going to explain how that pertains to us. So just bear with me for a few more minutes. I know it's a lot to take in, but there is a point. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to make a new recording. All right, there's a blip there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing with two tones. So now I'm going to shift, I'm going to record two tones at once. So this is 200 hertz and 900. And I'll just record a little bit of that. And we're going to take a look at this. You're not going to be tested on this, don't worry, but it will make sense. Okay, so we have our complex waveform now, right? So this has both the slow sweep of the 200 hertz, and it has the spiky sweeps, which are the 900 hertz. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it below. Now if I flip the polarity on this, oops, sorry. If I flip the polarity on this, both tones cancel. Okay? But if we do, that's polarity, if we do our phase, as I move this, I'm nudging here, you'll hear that the high tone cancels first. It's a faster waveform, and so we've actually made a null point for the high tone, but the low tone is unaffected. As I go more, now we're summing the high tone. I keep going further, and right in there we've totally canceled out the high tone, But our low tone is still going, but our low tone's getting softer. We keep going further, and now our low tone is gone. Right? So phase shift is frequency dependent. Let's do one other thing here. So this signal generator has another function. And that function is to generate noise. And there's a type of noise that we use in audio analysis, right? And this noise is called pink noise. And pink noise sounds like that. A lot of people use pink noise to sleep. You put on pink noise, and it's this equal throughout the entire frequency range type of noise. And so we're going to record just a little bit of pink noise, and I'm going to show you something else that happens. Okay, so there's our pink noise. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to put it on our secondary track again. If I do that, we'll get 6 dB more, and we're at minus 10. If I play them back together, right, we get up to 6 dB more, minus 4. Pink noise isn't a steady noise like a tone is. It's got some fluctuation in it. So what I want to show you now is another plugin that can show us what really happens during phase shift when it's not just one tone. So this is just an equalizer. You guys don't have this, but it's just a meter for me to show you something. We don't need this meter anymore. So now we have our two signals, our noise. Noise looks like this, by the way. That's pink noise. There's another kind of noise called white noise, but we're not using that for audio. And so this is what the signal looks like. As we start to shift this pink noise, you'll see something happen. First, listen to it, and listen what changes. Let me turn it up just a little bit. So go back. There's regular pink noise. Now I'm going to start moving that second waveform. So as I'm doing this, you hear the high end going away. And what's happening is because the high frequencies are closer together, they start to taper down as we move that second waveform. So we're just moving this waveform a little bit so far. And we've done this much damage to our audio signal. And as I continue on, we start to get all of these little dips in our audio. This is called comb filtering. And this happens all the time. And we try to avoid it as much as possible. Right? So let me give you one more little example of this. So this is an audio track. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it down because I know when we sum these two together, we're going to get an additional 6 dB. So I'm going to turn it down 6 dB. I'm going to do the same to this other track. And by the way, if you want to do fine increments in Pro Tools, if you hold down the Command key, it lets you do finer moves. So I've got both of those set to -6. So now I'm going to combine these two tracks. I'm going to get my 6 dB back, and we're going to listen, and then I'm going to start shifting and listen to what it does to the audio. I'm going to drag this plugin down here so we can see it. Turn down my master bus a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start shifting it now. So it's totally destroyed our audio now. It's canceling certain frequencies, it's not canceling others, it's making this nasty comb filtering effect. And this is what comb filtering sounds like. Right? So we want to avoid this as much as we can, but there's no way to really avoid it. So why is all this so important? Why did I go through this long talk and tell you all this? Because the same thing happens to sound as it travels through air. So if we have two microphones and we have a sound source, right, there is going to be a difference in time between when this microphone receives the signal and this microphone receives the signal. And it's going to cause some comb filtering, and it's going to cause some phase shift. Now, we can't avoid it, right? We can't, there's nothing we can do to avoid it. We can just try to minimize it. And sometimes it's even really desirable, because in this example, these are two Omni microphones in a spaced pair. And so this is actually not a bad thing. But in general life, we're trying to get as little, as clean of a signal and as accurate of a reproduction of an instrument as we possibly can. So generally when we're recording, you can't really adjust. I mean, you can. All right, let me rephrase that. You can adjust the delay of one of the microphones. Like I could add delay to this microphone if it's a digital console while I was recording. But it's very nerdy to try to do in a recording session. So what you want to do instead is try to get your mic placement proper. So you're minimizing this type of phase and phase shift and polarity cancellation also. So if we look at how you mic a snare drum, right? You have a snare drum, and most of the time, a lot of people, anyway, use a mic on the top and a mic on the bottom. And these mics are not pointed in a good direction, but it's just for a diagram. When you hit the top of this snare drum, the signal arrives to this microphone much faster than it arrives to this microphone. And so if you listen to this signal, when you hit this snare drum, it sounds horrible. It sounds thin and weird. And so if we're not going to be able to adjust the time while we're recording, there's the button on a mic pre that is a polarity switch. And most mic pre's have them. I'm not sure about your little interface, but it should. You can actually flip the polarity of the bottom microphone, and it will bring back your low frequencies. So this happens with drums quite a bit, sometimes with a bass drum too. You'll have a microphone inside the bass drum and a microphone outside the bass drum. And you want to be able to capture that and have it as phase coherent as it could possibly be. So this also happens with PA systems. Okay, so If I'm setting up a PA system in an arena, I have a big giant array, a banana-shaped PA that hangs from the ceiling. And then but I have multiple speakers all over the venue. And I have to make sure that those speakers, the sound arrives at the listener in the exact same time, or as close as I can get it. If you move a little bit, it shifts some, but I'll have my big PA, and I'll have a little speaker that sits on the lip of the stage that's called a front fill. And so what I have to do is electronically, I'll delay the front fill to match the timing of the big PA. So they're both reaching me at the same time, so I have to make the front fill later. And the same thing if you're in a big arena, you'll have your main PA, and then maybe halfway back the arena, you'll have a secondary PA for the people in the back of the arena. And I'll have to time align these sets of speakers too. It's not hard to do. I have a piece of software that helps me out, and I can look at this, and I can see all of this stuff. I can see the phase shift. I can see the comb filtering. I can see all of these problems that I'm discussing. And so that's the difference between polarity and phase shift, right? And they're very important to understand. You can go in after you've recorded something, and you can move the waveforms around and correct phase shift. And you can invert polarity later. But as you're recording, you want to get it as clean as you can. Okay. Any questions about that? I know it's a complicated little bit of information, and this is just an introduction to it, so you can start thinking about how your mic placement matters. And if you put two mics on one source, how are you going to make them so that they sound natural and pleasant? And you don't have comb filtering, and you don't have these problems. Comb filtering happens a lot more electronically than it does in air. Air is more forgiving. There's actually, if you go and you see The Lion King, right? The Lion King has a PA setup, and the PA setup has what they call an AB system. And for every speaker, there's two speakers. And because actors wear these little mics on their head, these little wig mics, they call them, or they're lapel mics is what they are, because they wear these on their heads, when two actors get close together and they're singing, this voice is going into his mic, but it's also going into her mic. And her voice is also going into his mic. And so you can get, as they move closer and further apart, you can get a very bad phasing problem. And the voices cancel out and they sound weird, and it's horrible. So because Lion King has more money than God, they put in a double PA system. And what they do is when two actors are together, they put one actor coming out of one speaker, and the speaker right next to it is the other actor. And because the phase cancellation is more forgiving in air than it is electronically, they went that extra route. Okay, so that's phase and polarity. Any questions on that, guys? That's a pretty big subject early on, and just I know it's a lot, but it is important. So let's talk about working with clips a little more today, and I'm just going to revert this session back to save. You guys have this session. I sent it to you in the class materials. Hopefully you all got it. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to do as we start talking about these waveforms is I want you to go ahead and turn your Zoom tool back on here in your session. Just make sure this is turned on. Because we're not only going to be zooming our waveforms in and out the way we have in the past, so that's our T and our R key, right? We're also going to be zooming them up and down. And you can do that with these little arrows here. So this zoom section has some actually really cool functions to it. You can zoom in and out horizontally, or you can zoom the waveform up and down so it's easier to see. It doesn't change the sound level. Like this would actually change the amplitude if you moved it here. This is actually only a visual representation. So you have those, you have your up and down, and you have your left and right. And then you have a separate control for the size of the MIDI notes if you're working with MIDI in this window. Underneath here are some buttons. And these buttons are zoom presets. So if you're working with audio and you want to be able to go back to a zoom setting so it's consistent, you can just use the number keys. And the number keys will switch between 5 different presets. Right? Apart from that, if you hit the E key will zoom whatever you have selected to fit in the entire window. So if I had it zoomed really small like this, I just went over and I clicked it, I hit the E key, boom, I'm ready to edit. Now I have mine set to full screen kind of mode here, but I really prefer it set another way. So if you go to your preferences and you go to zoom toggle, and you can select it to fit to window. That's a little too big. You can't really scroll easily, so I usually bring it down to like jumbo or something like that. And now when you hit the E key, it toggles between, so if I was small like this and I hit the E key, it would toggle and it would be a nice size for editing. So there's some shortcuts, and I'll just share those with you, and you can use whichever one you want. The great thing about Pro Tools is there's many shortcuts to do the same thing, and some are more convenient for some people than others. To zoom in and out horizontally, we talked about that we can use the R and T key, right? But you can also use a command key, which is command and the brackets. And I put these in our little notes of shortcuts that I gave you. And the other way to do it is to use your scroll wheel. And if you hold down the Option key and scroll, then you're going to get it zooming in and out too. And this is really quick to work with. I like this. I use this a lot. So if you don't hold any keys down and you hit scroll, it moves the tracks up and down. And if you hold down the Option key, it moves them that way. If you hold down Shift and Option, it'll make them bigger and smaller. So those are 3 really quick ways to zoom and work on waveforms, just by using the scroll wheel and a couple of modifier keys. There's one other vertical zoom command, which is the same as our brackets command. You can hold down Command Option, I think it is, yeah, Command Option, and zoom that way. So that's just a few different keys that you can use. But the number presets are really cool, and you can even save these presets by going to a zoom level and option clicking on one of these buttons, and then it'll remember your preset. But it's really fast when you're editing. So we've talked about our different edit modes, right? We've talked about our slip mode. When the slip mode, wherever you put the cursor, it's going to, the cursor will go anywhere. It's free to go wherever you put it, right? We have our grid mode, and our grid mode only stops, the cursor only goes on grid markers, depending on how you have this set. We talked briefly about shuffle mode. Shuffle mode is really useful, but this is one of these tools that I use it and I immediately turn it off because you can get in trouble if you don't. So with shuffle mode, I could listen to this little drum beat. And if I wanted to start on the second measure, I'd go to grid first, and I would select back, and I could go to shuffle now, and just hit the delete key. And everything right of this edit is going to snap. This is going to go away, and this is going to snap back to the beginning. So now I've cut out a measure of drums. The other things you can do with shuffle is you can do the same thing. I'll go back to grid. I'll select something in this area, and I can delete that, and then these two pieces collapse together. If I have regions that are separated by time, I can take my grabber tool and I can go into shuffle mode. And if I just drag it a little bit to the left, it will snap to the next region. And this is really fast for editing. Now, once I've snapped it, I can't do anything with it anymore because it's already been snapped. Right? I can move it in position and flip these around, but I'm not going to do that. So these are the type of functions you can do with shuffle. And so as soon as you're done with it, go back to grid mode. Okay. So let's take a look at these waveforms a little bit. So this is a drum beat, and you notice this drum beat, it has very sharp initial attacks. These are our transients that we've been talking about, and it's just that little spike there. Let me zoom in. And you can see that has a very sharp attack. It actually looks like it's been compressed because this little tiny peak has gone through and then it flattens out there. So that's a drum hit, and it's got a sharp transient and a quick decay. If I look at this section in between the drum hits, you can see that there's no level there. It's blank. So if I play that, there's no sound. The other mode I didn't mention was spot mode. And with spot mode, you can move a clip to a specific place. So if I have spot mode selected and I click on this clip, you get a dialog box that comes up. And this dialog box, you can type whatever you want. So right now it's set to time code. So if you were doing a film score and you knew that your music started at 1 hour and 30 seconds, you could type that in here, and when you hit OK, this region would jump to that exact location. If you wanted this loop to start at bar 9, you could go to bars and beats. You could type in 9 and hit OK, and the region will jump to 9. So it's just a manual way to enter in the location that you want the region to go. So we talked a little bit about transitional editing, and you guys did some edits for me on that. That was great. Some of them were really creative. I really liked them. But if you look at all of these little blips here, these are all different instruments. And if you listen to them, this first one, I'm going to go to grid mode. And if you listen to this first one, it's a kick drum. Right? So this is the initial part of the kick drum, and then this is the sustain of the kick drum. And then the next one, it's a hi-hat and a shaker. And that's a different shaker. And that's a snare drum. And then we have a kick drum again. So if I wanted to take this beat, I could edit it the way we did the other week, and I could just copy. And I could paste, and I could make, more 16th notes or whatever you feel. Right? So I could do that. And we talked about that already. But the other thing that works a lot better sometimes is if you do your editing on an additional track. So you can be adding other sources as opposed to just pasting over. So for example, if I wanted to add a kick drum, maybe I'll put a kick drum there. Right? If I wanted to add a snare drum, or a clap, I guess that is, I could, add a couple of claps there. And I'm just adding to this waveforms that are already here. Right? So this is a quick way to manipulate your samples, and a quick way to work with editing. And if I wanted to, add a stinger to this track, right, it just ends abruptly. I could just grab a kick drum, and I could add a stinger. Okay, so this is just the basics of editing and working with our grid. So these transients that we have here, this piece is very quantized, so everything is pretty much right on the grid. But that's not always the case. And if you want to grab a waveform, you can zoom way in and you can find that transient, and you can, put your cursor there. If I'm in slip mode, I can find it exactly. And I can zoom back out, and I can come over here, and I can copy, and I can, put that sample wherever I want. But there's an easier way to do that, and that's this little button up here. This little button is called Tab to Transient. So Tab to Transient does exactly what it says. It will enable you to go from one transient to the next just by hitting the Tab key. Normally, without Tab to Transient turned on, if you have a bunch of regions here and you want to go to the next region, you can hit Tab, and Tab will take you to the beginning of that region. And if you hit Tab again, it'll take you to the end of that region. And Tab again will take you to the beginning of the next region, and the end, and the beginning, and the end. And so it skips the blank space in between. And so that's a quick way to get to different regions when you're editing, just by using the Tab key. You can go backwards too by holding down the Option key and hitting the Tab button. So now I'm at the front. Now I'm at the back. I don't know how well you guys can see that little cursor moving. Right? So that's normal tabbing. If you turn on Tab to Transient, which is this little button here. All right, so you turn on Tab to Transient and you go back to your waveform. Go back to the top. I'll make these a little bigger so it's easier to see. When I hit Tab, it will tab to the next transient. So if you wanted to separate all these little hits out, and maybe you wanted to make some kind of sample editing project out of this, you could just hit Tab, and then you could hit the B key, and now that's all separated. So I hit Tab here, I hit the B key, I hit Tab, hit the B key, Tab, B key. Right, and it's very quick to separate things out. So now that I have all these separated, I can just grab them and I can make whatever beat I want. I can start dragging over here, and I can, I can do whatever I want. I need to be in grid mode though, because I have all the transients separated. have all the clips separated at the transients. And so when I do that, as I put this back together, it's going to fall completely in time. Each one of these is going to fall exactly on the grid because I've chopped at the transient. Sometimes you'll get funny little noises in between. And again, sometimes those are desirable, but usually they're not. And you can fix that by just fading, making a little crossfade here. So what I would do is I would go to slip mode and I would use my trim tool and just kind of drag this back. And then I can go to my selector and I can make a little crossfade. Hit the F key to make a crossfade. So that's more transitional editing and waveform editing. If we want to, let's go to another example. Let me show you something else. So let's take a look at this waveform. Okay, so here's my first hit. And if we zoom, make the waveform a little taller, you can see that, whoops, this hit doesn't fall on the grid at all. Right? And then this one is on the grid. This is way off the grid here. This one's on the grid, and way off the grid here. And the reason this happens, if we take a listen to this, right? So what's happened? So we can't select this with the grid because the grid is in eighth notes and this is a swing feel or a shuffly type feel. So we can go to our grid and we can try to select triplets, and that would be da 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 da, right? If we do that, well, it still doesn't line up because it's not really a straight triplety shuffle. So in this case, it could be difficult to edit. So I'm going to turn triplet back off because that's another danger thing. If you leave that on, you can mess up your editing. So how can I fix this? How can I copy and paste this? There's something called, and we've been avoiding it so far, relative grid. So if you click once, you get the blue grid. And then you click again and you get this relative grid. And so the relative grid, if I go to slip mode and I select something like this little blip here, and I copy it, and then I go to relative grid and I paste it, it's falling the same distance from the grid as it was before. Okay, so there's my little attack there. And this is the same distance from this grid point as this is. So I'm keeping synced to the grid even though I'm not really editing on the grid. So there's a bunch of different uses for this, but it's really helpful. Another thing you could do is if you had a piece of music. Let's undo this. And let's just say that our loop starts here. Here's our grid marker here, and here's our loop. So if I select this region, and if I were to just drag this in regular grid, this region is going to snap to that grid marker, and that's not where it was before. I'm going to undo. And you can see here's the grid marker, and the region is not on the grid because it's a shuffle feel. So if I snap it, I'm not in sync anymore. But if I take and I use relative grid and I drag it, it remembers how far off the click you were or the grid marker you were. And so now I can just drag this around and it stays in sync. Right? Everybody understand this? This is a new concept here, and it's different. So it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around it. Any questions about that, about the relative grid and how it works? I think if you just play around with it some, you'll figure it out. Just grab something and try to drag it around. And, here's another example. So this, if I had a loop that started right here, right, here's my grid marker here, and my loop is offset to that grid. And if I drag it with my regular grid, it's going to snap to the wrong place. It will snap right on that bar line. And that's not the same as it was before. And if I go to relative grid, I do the same thing. Now it's the same. Jump in there, guys, with any questions. Okay? So let's go and let's do something else now. Enough drum editing. So we talked a little bit about editing music and how to edit down music so that it works for different spots. Maybe you have a 3-minute piece, and maybe you want to make it 2 minutes long for a video, or maybe you want to make it 30 seconds long for a little commercial spot, or whatever. But you have this piece of music and you need to edit it down. So I want to take a look at this, and this was played in without a lot of quantization. And so as we're listening down, I'm listening for the form of the song and trying to figure out where I can make musical edits. Nice break there. Okay, so now we're back to the head of the song. So we've already heard this information. Now we're back on the chorus. Oh, there's our breakdown again. Okay, so I want to shorten this piece a lot. So I'm going to start whacking stuff out of it. First thing I want to do is, it's not really lined very well to the grid. I already have my tempo set here, which is a bonus, and we'll get into how to deal with it when you don't have your tempo in the next examples. But the first thing I want to do is I want to move this start point of the music a little closer to the grid. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to make my waveform bigger so I can really see what's going on. And I would say this is probably a little guitar strum going into it. I'm not sure. It could be a noise going into it. But I think I'm gonna set my my grid to about there. So I've just zoomed in, and I find a spot that's pretty that's at 0 as close as I can, so that when I make an edit, even if I didn't have a crossfade, it wouldn't make any noise because we're at 0 amplitude. So I'm just going to separate right there. I'm going to hit the B key. Zoom back out. And now I'm going to go to shuffle mode, and I'm going to hit delete. And now it's snapped right to that bar line. So now my edits will probably be a little cleaner. And after I make my edits, if I decided I wanted that little bit back, I could always just go to slip mode, and I can just drag that back, and I've still got my beginning, but all my transients are falling much closer to my grid. So let's see what we want to do here. Well, the intro is long. That's always a good thing to shorten. So let's cut some of that intro out. So that's 4 bars, way too much. Don't need that for a short piece. So I'm going to go to a larger grid value so it's easier to make my edits. Maybe I'll go to quarter notes. And I'm going to select whatever part of this I want to delete it. I'm going to go back to our grid here and get rid of that little bit that I added back. So musically, I could generally, when you're editing and you have a 4-bar phrase, you want to take out measures 2 and 3. So you have the beginning of the source or the section, and you have the end of the section, so they tie in together nicely. So your transition from one part to the other goes in smoothly. So let's try that first. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to go to shuffle mode. I'm going to hit delete. Okay, it's okay. You know, it's kind of weird to have a kick drum coming in that quickly for no reason. So I'm going to undo that. Let's try another one. Let's see what happens if I just select, back to grid mode, if I just select the bars, these 2 bars, the ones with the kick drum, and just go straight from guitar to music. Okay, that works too. The other option is to delete the first 2 bars and see how that works. Shuffle mode, delete. And that kind of feels the most natural for me. I mean, you make your own decisions. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, so that's 8 bars long. I want to cut that in half. That's too long for me. So I'm just going to go to grid mode, and I'm going to select. I'm going to do the same technique that I was talking about. I'm going to cut out the middle of the edit. I'm not going to cut out at the beginning of the section or at the end of the section, because the transitions a lot of times won't work when you do that. So this is an 8-bar phrase. So I'm going to cut out the middle 4 bars. And I'm just going to select them like that. And if you look at your counter up here, you can see the length that you have selected, and that's exactly 4 bars. I'm going to hit delete. Great. So that works out pretty good. Let's take a look at our edit, though, and see how we did. Ooh, so you see that little jump in the waveform there? That's going to make a tick. And, you know, once a project goes to mastering, a lot of times they brighten up the music, and when they brighten up the music, even if you're not hearing it now, by the time it goes to mastering and there's more separation and they're enhancing those higher frequencies, you're going to hear a little tick noise. And then the mastering engineer has to get out another program and delete them, and it's a pain in the rear. So we're going to do a little crossfade instead. So if I just hit the F key, it'll make a crossfade. But there's another thing you can do. If you hit Command F, it not only does a crossfade, but it brings up a crossfade window. In this crossfade window, we can change a lot of parameters of the fade. So we can have it behave different for different situations. This one, a crossfade is fine. But just so you know, there's all these different types of curves that you can do with your crossfades. And you can even select a different crossfade in. And if you unlink here in the center, this links the two crossfade in and your crossfade out. So the red one would be your crossfade in and the blue one would be your out. So you can change these if you unlink here in the center, put it on none, you can actually change the shape of your crossfades. And so you can make it however you like. If you put one on a shape and the other one on standard, the one that's on the shape, you can actually drag the shape however you like. And I'm going to show you some of these later when we start editing some songs that have some longer phrases in them. And I'll show you a way that you can make the phrase, if you have a long string passage with sustain and you're going into a drum beat, and when you edit the drum beat to the strings, it chops off part of the ambience. I'm going to show you how to use crossfades to fix that. But right now we're just going to go and we're going to say standard. And we're just going to do a regular crossfade. But in order to bring up that dialog box, you have to hit Command F and not just F. While we're talking about fades, let me show you 2 more little key commands that are really cool. And this is very fast for editing. So if you wanted to fade in this piece right here, your fade key is the F key, but you can also, if you want to fade in, you hit the D key right next to the F key, the D key. And that draws a fade in. If you wanted to fade this out, like this ending is too long, I'm going to delete this little bit of audio here. Maybe I'll fade out starting here. You can hit the G key. So all 3 of those keys are right next to each other. You have the D for the fade in, the F for the crossfade, and the G. Right? So it's really quick to work like that. And combining what we've talked about with the tab and tab to transients and all that, if I just chop this up, I'm going to go to slip mode, and I'm just going to show you a quick example, and then we'll get back to editing our piece. And if I just had a bunch of edits in here, I'm just hitting the B key randomly. And I want to crossfade all of these edits. It's really quick and you can stay zoomed in. So what you can do is you can zoom in to a comfortable zoom amount. And then you can hit your tab key. And that's going to take you to this next. Oops. You have to turn off tab to transients. We're talking about normal tab now. So the tab will take you to this next region end. So now my cursor is here. And I can simply select and hit the F key. And then I hit tab again. And I get to this next area here. And I can select and I can hit the F key. I hit tab, it goes to the end of the fade. I hit tab again, it goes to my next edit. I can select and hit the F key. So you can go through and you can edit a track very quickly just by tab, F, hit tab twice, F, right? And so these keystrokes, once you get them down, become second nature. And I can go through and I could edit an entire drum track that could have hundreds of edits in it. And I can go through and I can draw my crossfades incredibly quickly and efficiently and be able to see exactly what I'm doing and not have to be zooming in and out because I'm using my tab key to get from one to the next. So we cut out the middle of this section. Now we're on our chorus. Right, so that chorus is pretty long too. That's 4 bars. I'm going to do my exact same technique. So there's bar 1, there's bar 2, bar 3, and bar 4. I'm going to cut out bars 2 and 3. Go to shuffle mode, hit delete. And now I have. So I've cut that in half now. Let's take a look at that edit and make sure it's okay. I'm going to go back to slip mode, draw a little crossfade, hit the F key. I'm going to zoom back out. And let's see the next section. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's not even 4 bars long, so we don't need to edit that one down. So our form so far is we have an intro that we've cut down from 4 bars to 2 bars, and then we have a verse that we've cut down, and from 8 bars to 4 bars. So now we have 2 bars, 4-bar verse, a 4-bar chorus, and now we have an almost 4-bar second verse, if you will. So this is symmetrical. It feels natural. And now we come up to this little breakdown section. Okay, so we probably, if we're going to cut this really short, we probably don't want to hear the solos. So those are usually the first things to go. So just for a marker here, I'm going to put a little separation. I'm just going to hit the B key, and I'm going to know that that's where my little breakdown happens. Now, if our song was already short enough, maybe we could leave some of that stuff in, but I really want to chop it. So I know I've got a verse, and I know I have a chorus coming up, and I know I have this ending. there's my breakdown again. So I'm going to put another marker there. And I'm just going to edit out all of this center stuff. I'm going to double click because I have a marker here and a marker here. Or a separation, not a marker, separation. And I'm going to go to shuffle mode and hit delete. And now our piece that was probably 3 minutes long before is down to about 40 seconds. And it still maintains all of its musicality, feels natural, and the edits all work. And then if we wanted to shorten it even more, I could delete part of that and put a little fade out at the end. So this is a really crucial skill to have. And no matter what you're doing, if you're songwriting, maybe you want to cut out a verse. If you're doing film scoring, then you're definitely going to want to be able to edit your audio and do it in a concise way. We talked about tab to transients. That was the big one. And we're going to use that again in just a minute with the next session. So I'm going to just close this session out. I'm going to save. And I'm going to open a brand new session. And if you guys want to follow along, the audio files that I sent you in the folder are what we're going to be importing in. So I'm going to make a new Pro Tools session. And I'm just going to call this drum edit. And I'm going to make sure that all my settings are correct. 48, 24-bit, interleaved, prompt for location. Hit create. I'm going to put it in my folder, my Recording Studio Fundamentals folder. And now I have a blank session. So something happened when I did my blank session. I don't have a preference set correctly. So if I'm going to go into my preferences now, and I didn't get a click track added automatically. So that means that this little box that we talked about before wasn't selected. So I don't have a click track. So we know how to make a click track. I'm going to go to the track menu and I'm going to go all the way down and create click track. So we've talked about editing, but we haven't talked about how to get audio in and out. So the next thing I want to do is show you a couple of different ways to import audio. The first one is the simple one, which is just you go down in the File menu and you scroll all the way down to Import. And you can go to Import Audio. And then you'll get a little dialog box. And I made this folder of loops for us to import. And I'm just going to grab a few of these. Let's do Cold Sweat and Funky Drummer. We'll just do those two for right now. And I'm going to hit Convert because these were at a different sample rate than my session. Actually, no, it says I can hit Add. Let's see here. No, these are at the correct sample rate, so I can either add or convert, but I'm going to go ahead and hit convert just to be safe. And it's going to copy those audio files to my audio files folder. Then I hit open. Yeah, it is converting, I see. So these files were at 44.1. My session is at 48. So it's going to convert these files now. And it's asking where I want to save them, and it's going to automatically tell me to put them in my drum edit folder in the audio files folder. So it should default to that. And now I get this little dialog. It says, Well, what do you want to do with these audio files you're pulling in? I can either assign them to a track and have them pop up immediately in my edit window here, or I can just have them go over to our clip list over here. So I'm going to do that for right now. If you wanted to go straight in and make a new track, here's a couple of different options here. You can have the audio file start it right at the session start, or you can have it start at wherever your cursor is, or you can have it bring up that same spot dialog and you can tell it, I want to start at measure 1, I want to start at measure 4, or whatever. So let's just go ahead and we'll put them in the clip window right now, in the clip list. So now they're over here in our little clip bin. And you can see there's the two files, Cold Sweat and Funky Drummer. So in order to put them into my session, I can either just make a new audio track, and I can just drag it over. And now I can drag this in. So that's one way. You can just import the audio files right into your session. Another way is you can actually just drag them from the desktop. All right. So I can just drag these in, and I can drag them into several locations. I can drag them straight into the clip bin and add them that way. I can drag them onto this blank section here and add them that way, and it will make a new track for me. Or I can drag them into this little tracks dialog here. Let me make this window smaller. To the tracks list. Up here. And it will make a new track for me and import it in. Alrighty, so now we have this little Cold Sweat loop here. Turn off the click. And you notice that the loop is repeating over and over. That's because I have this function turned on, and if you go to your transport window up here and you right click, you can see that there is loop playback. So you can toggle that on and off. I have loop record on. I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so that's a function of that. If I turn off loop playback, then I'm going to get just one play and it stops. So we have this loop now, but it's not in time with the click at all. So let's turn the click back on. All right. So how do we fix this? I'm going to go up and I'm going to select bars and beats in our counter here. And I'm going to, I know if I listen to this loop, I'll turn off the click. If I listen to this loop, 3, 4, it's a 1-bar loop, right? So I want to make this loop, I want to make my tempo match this loop. So there's a real quick and easy way to do it. And we talked about it a little before, Command I. And that brings up this add bars and beats dialog box. So right now my loop is starting on measure 1, and it's ending on measure 2, beat 1, 258 ticks. So if I want to change that, all I have to do is type in the correct ending, and it will figure out the tempo for me. So I'm going to do that now. I'll just type in 2 and hit enter. And now if you look up here at our tempo, it's some weird crazy tempo. We turn on our click. Okay, so now our click track is at the right tempo for our loop. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do it to this next one too. I'm going to take this track and I'm going to drag it using the grid mode to the first beat of a measure. Turn off the click and let's take a listen to this. So that one's 2 bars long. So let's go ahead and we'll make that one 2 bars long by using the same command, Command I. And when I bring this up, I get the same dialog box. And now instead of ending, it starts on measure 2, and instead of ending on measure 3, 4, whatever the nomenclature is there, I'm going to put it exactly 4, and I just hit the 4, and all the other things clear out here if I hit the 4 there, and I hit OK. Now I have a different tempo here. So, and I'm turn my click back on, and I can tell that I'm okay. So that's how you can get your loops in tempo, or how you can set your tempo to match your loops, I should say. There's another way to deal with this, and it's a new tool that we haven't used yet. So I'm going to undo that. So my tempo is back to 120. Now, if I wanted to make this loop match my tempo of the song, I can go to my trim tool and I can select TCE. And this stands for time expansion and compression, or time compression and expansion. So if I have this tool turned on and I'm in grid mode, I can simply click here, and this is going to time compress. It's going to get faster, but it's going to be in sync with my click. So I've compressed that region, so I've made it shorter, so it means it's going to get faster. So the thing with time expansion and compression is it generally sounds better if you make things shorter than if you extend them. So if I took this same bit and I extended it out to here, then the waveforms, it starts getting a lot of artifacts. Right? It starts to sound phasey and strange. So you can only expand things a certain amount before it starts sounding unusual. Of course, that's also a creative tool. If you want it to be unusual sounding, you can do that. So that's time expansion and compression, and you can do that with any instrument. Let's see here. Try one more loop here. It's the same one. There's one that I had. I think maybe it's this one. Oh, this is a stereo loop.
One, two, three, four.
Okay, so how do we put this in time? First thing we have to do is get rid of that count off. So I'm going to go back to my regular trim tool. Actually, I'm going to use my selector tool instead. And I'm going to put my cursor down close to it, go to slip mode, and I'm just going to zoom in and see what we have. So there's my transient. So we talked about how to get there, right? We can either just manually do it and zoom way in like that. Or we can use our tab to transient, and that's this last button here. And it'll give you the computer's idea of what the transient is. So I'm just going to, since I already have the beginning of this at the first downbeat there, right on the grid line, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to use my shuffle key and delete. And now I'm turn off the click. Now we have to get the tempo set the same as this loop. So we're going to use the same technique. I'm going to go to so there's my fifth measure. And I'm going to use tab to transient. I'm going to separate. Yeah, it's better to separate. Command I. And we know it's 4 bars long, and we're starting on measure 5. So that means that this next thing here should be at measure 9. So I'm going to hit 9, hit enter, and let's hear if we're locked with a click now. Okay, so there we go. So we're locked in with a click now. Once we've done that, you can change the way that this audio functions. I'm just going to delete the rest of this loop because we don't need the whole thing right now. You can change the way this audio behaves. And the way you do that is down here, there's a little clock symbol. And that clock represents samples. So you can either have the way your audio behaves in samples, meaning it will just stay this length no matter what you change about the tempo. Oh, whoops, I forgot one step. So you change here to samples or to ticks, and then here you have to turn on this is a loop, so I'm going to go for rhythmic. And what that does is it recalculates this, and it allows you to stretch the tempo the same way you would with MIDI. So now if I redo my tempo, I change it to 125. Now it expands. And now my tempo now I'm slowed down. If I speed up my tempo, 135, the waveform actually changes. So this is how you get your loops to stay in sync. And this is using elastic time in Pro Tools. Everybody kind of get a grasp of what that's doing. Let me do it. Should I do it one more time and explain it again? So you have to turn on, first you have to switch it from samples to ticks. And then you have to turn on this thing called elastic audio. And I'm going to set it to rhythmic. The only two that we use are polyphonic and rhythmic. Polyphonic, even if it's a mono synthesizer or a solo flute or whatever, polyphonic just works better. So if it's a musical instrument with pitch, you can select polyphonic. If it's a drum beat, you can select rhythmic. So now that I have this turned on, this waveform is capable of being edited and changed by simply changing the tempo. So this is set to ticks and elastic audio is turned on. And if I change my tempo, 133, you see this little emblem here? That means that this has been changed by elastic audio, and elastic audio is activated. Okay. So now whatever I change my tempo to, this is going to follow. Not only that, if I have a loop at a different tempo, let's do the same thing over here. Go ahead and identify. We'll make this 2. Now, so I have one tempo here. If I take this loop now and I drag it over to here, it's going to conform to this tempo. Right? It's shuffle versus straight, but they're both playing at the same tempo. They're both in time with the click. Right? So this becomes elastic. Elastic audio, elastic. So when you turn on elastic audio, and you can go to this page called Analysis. And what Analysis does is it goes through and it looks at all the transients, and it locks those transients to a tempo. Right? So each one of these transients is now locked exactly to a tick. So if I look at this, you know, this is not exactly on a beat, but it's locked there compared to the next grid marker. So it knows how much to stretch and how much to change things. So once you have elastic audio turned on, you can do all sorts of manipulation to the waveforms and to the sample. For example, now that all of these independent things are locked, you could select this whole loop. You could hit option 0. And you see now in our quantize window, it says elastic audio events are being quantized. And so now I can take that and I could turn on tuplet and I could quantize this. So it's quantizing the actual audio now. Right? And if you want to get even crazier with it, undo that. You can go and you can quantize it to straight. And it'll probably have some problems with that, but let's see what it does. So it made it kind of a double time feel. You can also do the same thing. You can transpose it. So now that we have elastic audio turned on, this is free to be edited. And so I'm going to just transpose it down. I don't know, a bunch of semitones there. And now, So you can actually change the tuning and the pitch of your drums. And this can be really creative. It can be a lot of fun. You could take this track. I'll undo that. I'm going to duplicate this whole track now. And then I'm going to take this bottom track and I'm going to pitch it down. And then this top track I'm going to leave normal. So that's the top track. You can take these things and you can combine them together and you can make a unique sonic thing. Right? And if you want to get crazy, you can add whatever effects you want to it. You can compress it. You don't have to know this. I'm just playing around right now. But you can take and add a compressor to it. Give it some snap. Right. So you've got all this flexibility now that we have this tool, Elastic Audio. And I'm just kind of touching on this stuff. So guys, jump in there with any questions because these are really great tools and you'll be able to use them on your projects later. All right, so the next thing I'd like to show you is, let's say that we had an edit. I'm going to just get rid of these tracks for right now. So let's say that we had this Radiohead. This is just a string track from a Radiohead song. It's a stem. And let's say we had this cool string intro. And let's say during the end of this tail, we had this drum beat on the same track. And right here is the beginning of our beat. And we wanted to marry these two things together. And we wanted to, at the end of our little vocal string deal here, we wanted these drums to kick in. So if we just plop them together like that and listen. Okay, it's not very natural. Let's spread them out a little more. Right, because the whole tail of that vocal string thing just gets chopped off. So one easy way to fix it is to just make another track and have them overlap. But we're talking about crossfades here. So what you can do is you can take and draw a fade. And I want my fade to start basically about here, but I want it to go all the way in to the drum beat. So as this vocal is fading out, this drum beat starts and it just hits hard, but underneath the drums, we have the vocal fading out. So I'm going to hit Command F and bring up my crossfade box. So the first thing we want to do, if we just do a regular crossfade and we listen to it, the drums are fading in. I want the vocals to fade out, but I don't want the drums to fade in. I want them to hit hard. So how can we do this in this window? The blue line is our fade out, and the red line is our fade in. So we want the blue line to be gradual and fade out like this. But we want the red line to fade in sharp. So if you look down here, there's different fade shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and leave my blue line a nice long fade like that. But my red line, I want to change it. I want it to hit hard. So I'm just going to make a, oops, I have them linked right there. You have to unlink first. So let's go back and do that again. So now I want my blue line to fade out nice. That's my vocals, but I want my drums to hit hard, the red. So I'm going to make my fade in shape hard edged. And now if we listen to the crossfade, the drums hit hard, but the vocals continue to fade. So I can even drag this further if I want. And you can change your fade shapes by using the trim tool and dragging. And so now my voice is going to continue on even longer underneath the drums. So some of you did, in your homework assignments, did some edits that you had some tricky crossfades that you needed to make happen in order for the edits to be smooth. And this is the way you do that, by using the fade dialog box and unlinking here in the center. And then you can independently change your in and out shapes. So that's the crossfade dialog, and I want to show you one other thing. If I had this track, and maybe I had pasted it together and made a drum track by pasting little bits together. And so I had a bunch of edits in it. I'm just going to put a bunch of random edits in. Right? So I've got all these edits in my track, and I need to crossfade all of my edits. There's a way you can do that that will do everything at once automatically for you. I'm not going to go real deep into this dialog box, but if you hit the F key, the Command F key now, with a bunch of fades selected, you get a bigger fade dialog box. And so what you can do with this is, if you can have independent fade ins for like the beginning of a piece, or independent fade outs for the end of a piece, and then you have a crossfade section in the center. So in this crossfade section, you can tell it that you want to generate new crossfades, create new crossfades. But I don't want any fade ins, so I'm going to turn that off. And I don't want any fade outs, because the beginning and the end of my piece are fine. I just want to work on this center section. You have the same type of editing. You can change the shape. Right? You can link things or unlink them. And you can create new crossfades. And when you do that, you can set how long you want the crossfade to be down here under the milliseconds. So I'm going to do, I don't know, 10 millisecond crossfade. And I'm going to hit enter. And when I do that, it automatically went through and drew crossfades on every edit. Now, I don't know if they're great crossfades, but it drew them for me. So that's a big thing. If you've got 200 edits in a song, then you can have a lot of work done for you automatically. So if you don't like where the crossfade falls, you can use the grabber tool, and you can just slide these things around. So I can put my crossfade right there. And then by using the new commands I showed you, the tab and option tab, you can tab to the next crossfade, and you can adjust that. You can tab to the next one, or I'm hitting option tab to go backwards. Right? And you can just move these things around, and just by using tab and option tab, you can find all of your edits and quickly fix everything. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff today, guys. I'm not going to keep you late. We're just going to call it tonight. Any questions on that? Any of that?
Do you generally recommend using the rhythmic setting for the audio stretching, whatever it's called,
Yeah,
for drums, and then using polyphonic for everything else,
Correct.
essentially?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's called Elastic Audio. And yeah, that's the way you operate it.
Great.
Play around with it some, and you'll see how it works. It's not that complicated. And there's another tool that goes hand in hand with it called Beat Detective, but I think we've done enough information for one night. I'll talk to you about Beat Detective next week. And Beat Detective allows you to do all sorts of other type of manipulation. But these are the crucial parts of Pro Tools editing. And the way to get fast at editing is to practice and just go through and make a bunch of random edits and then slide them around and get used to the way the tools work. All right. Any more questions?
I was just wondering if you had a couple minutes after class, just to, I need some help with my microphone setup. It's giving me
Sure.
problems. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, no problem. Anybody else? How are you doing? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a quick, somewhat unrelated question to the lesson, but very related to what we do in class. I was wondering if you could give suggestions for headphones that you might recommend, because I'm using some really terrible ones right now.
Yeah, I have a collection of headphones. I'm a big fan of well, I like these. These are Beyers and these are nice. But I'm a big fan of Sennheiser headphones. I have if you want to spend money, if you want to get an expensive pair that's going to last you forever, Sennheiser 650s. But they're open air headphones, which means that they're not good for singing. Right? They don't seal at all. So there's a grill on the sides of the headphones, and they sound great, but they don't seal. These are type of headphones I use for mixing. Okay, these Beyers seal fairly well. These are, I don't remember the model. These are DT77 Pros or 770 Pros. These seal fairly well. If you want to go cheaper, Sennheiser makes a pair. I think they're Sennheiser 260s, I think is the number. And they're nice headphones. They seal well. Audio-Technica also makes some very nice headphones. Hang on, let me look in my cabinet here.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So these are the Sennheisers. And these are Sennheiser 280 Pros. All right, these are the Sennheiser 280s. These is an older version of the Sennheiser 650s, and these are kind of my babies. I love these headphones. These are 580s. And it's really supposed to be the same driver in these headphones as the 650s that I have. But there's something about the way they seal. They don't seal quite as tight, and I like the response better.
So those are better for if you're sitting and mixing, but not if you're actively singing.
Correct. These are mixing headphones because they don't seal tight enough. These Sennheisers seal incredibly tight, but you need to go to a music store and listen to these things because everybody has their own tastes in headphones. If you want a brighter headphone, these are what people used for years, but they're a little too bright for me. These are Sony 7506s. And these headphones are about $100. and so are these Sennheiser headphones, about $100. The Audio Technicas I like even better, but I have no idea where mine are. I think they're called Audio Technica M50s, and they seal really well. They have a bit of a hypey low end, so if you like that hypey low end, they have that. Yeah, so the 650s, those are like $400, so those are expensive headphones. I'm not even sure how much these cost. You have a pair up there, Raphael. I think you had the same headphones as me. I don't know what they cost, because they gave me a pair. Bayer gave me a pair.
These are the DT770 Pros. I got them on Sweetwater for I think $250.
Right.
I don't know if they were on sale, but I really like them.
Yeah, I really like mine too. I like them, and they're good for both mixing and singing. You know, they seal tight enough that you don't get that much bleed. So
Gotcha.
those are the recommendations I have off the top of my head. Yeah, either the Audio Technicas, the Sennheisers, these Sony 7506s. All the video guys love these 7506s because they're nice and bright. You can hear noises and and things like that. So, but I would really
on sale. Sweetwater, they're only $150.
great,
So,
great, yeah.
just look
I recommend
Good to
these.
know.
I like these. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
I know that's one important component. I should probably be able to hear pretty well what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, and guys, if you want, why don't we do this for our audio projects? Since I can't sit and be in the studio with you, how about if you take some photos of your mic setup and let me see what you got going, and maybe I can offer some suggestions. Maybe that'll be helpful. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to have different musicians come in. So I'm going to have a flamenco guitarist come in, and I'm going to use a bunch of different miking techniques, and I'm going to show you those, and I'm going to have him play, and I'm going to show you how I record and punch in and out and all that kind of stuff. I think it'll be nice to have some live musician interaction. And then hopefully the next week, if he's available, I'm going to have a very famous bassist do the same thing. His name is Carlitos Del Puerto. And Carlitos plays with everybody. He plays with Herbie Hancock, and he played with Chick Corea before he died. He does Barbra Streisand. He's just anybody. He's a big LA guy. He's the guy who was telling you the story about doing the Disney shoot and having the crazy time signatures every measure. So I'm going to go over to Carlitos' place, and I'll do some recording there. And he's a fun guy. He's just hilarious. Great, great cat. And then after that, I'll also probably end up going to a friend of mine has a studio, and I'll go over and do a drum session. And I'll show you how I mic drums. And, well, I'll have to do it. I can't do it live, so I'll have to make a video, and I'll kind of stop and start the video and talk about it, and hopefully give you guys some kind of more, not really hands-on experience, but real-world experience of what it takes to record and do that kind of thing. Because, sitting here and doing waveforms all day is fun, but we really want to be able to record ourselves, and the waveform stuff will come as you work with it. Alrighty. Any other questions? People still having trouble getting files to me? If you are, shoot me an email and let's figure out another way.
Professor, one more time, those headphones are the 770s?
Yeah, these are the DT770 Pros, I think.
Nice, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they sound nice and natural, and they don't require, like these Sennheisers, these expensive Sennheisers, they require a pretty hefty headphone preamp. So it's got to have quite a bit of power, or they sound a little thin. So if you're going to buy into something like that, I've got this.
So, Professor, you would like us to send a picture, like via email, or? Yeah,
just yeah, you can do email, however you want. I just want to be able to help you out, So yeah, if you're going to get into some higher end headphones, then you need to start thinking about a headphone amp. This is a little Rupert Neve amp, and Buddy gave it to me as a bonus for doing this project. But it's great, and these have a cleaner sound than trying to plug, headphones into your computer or into even your Scarlett,
So to understand that setup, it would go from like out from the Scarlett into that amp and then into your headphones.
Right. So this has got different inputs on the back of it here. So these are balanced inputs, and in the center is a guitar jack type of input.
Mm-hmm.
And then these are the RCA inputs, and then there's even a little stereo mini input, and then on the front there's 3 switches, A, B, and C.
Okay, so you can modify whatever input you want to listen to.
Right. But that's not necessary to start out with. I would say one step at a time. Get your headphones, and if your Scarlett powers them fine, then you should be fine. I think these headphones, you probably won't have a problem powering them with whatever.
Great.
Alrighty. So that's all I got for you today, guys. I'm going to try to not make these classes so long. I know I beat you up sometimes, and I was talking to a friend of mine. He said, "Yeah, you can't keep them there 2.5, 3 hours. It's just too long without a break." And so I'm going to try to shorten it for us so we don't get into sleepy land.
Well, thank you so much, Professor.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor.
Have a good night, guys. Anybody that wants to stay on and chat, just hang on there for a minute.
Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Have a good night. Stay safe from the virus, Professor.
Thanks, man.